Hi, this is Carmen Wild, and this is Business Without Barriers, the show with a mission to bring humanity back into business. And our guest today is Peta Klein-Fagan. Peta kicked off her career in style as an actress in London who owned a theatre company. In 2004, her life and career trajectory changed dramatically when she became the survivor of the Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami that claimed over 230,000 lives. This event inspired her to dedicate her life to being a trauma therapist and life coach, to being the vessel that holds a space for true compassion and human suffering and converts it into growth, self-love, and success. She has an honors degree in psycho-neuroimmunology, is an evolved NLP life coach, hypnotherapist, timeline therapist, and emotional freedom technique practitioner. Peta's passion for her work has created an abundant and successful practice. She finds deep fulfillment in helping others master their life experiences and gain back a sense of empowerment. She cites two of her most cherished successes as her two gorgeous daughters and celebrates every victory along the way that enables them to be connected, secure, and thriving. Peta is the embodiment of pure joy and living proof that a life and business without barriers is possible. Peta, it's such a privilege to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And with a welcome like that, an introduction, it makes me want to hang out all day. This is where I will park. Thank you. Lovely to be with you.
Beautiful to see you after all these years and to see that spirit shining through still. And so you have this infectious, bouncy energy, Peta, and so much so that when my partner, Gary Wild, met you, I don't know how many years ago, that must have been about 10 years ago, he nicknamed you Pink Bunnies.
Yes, he did. He really did. Absolutely.
What's your secret?
What is my secret? I'm not sure if I have a secret more than a blessing. I think that I've been brought up with understanding that every decision that you make, you have a choice. And yes, there's suffering, and yes, there are things that are tough to swallow out there, but you can either go down with it or you can allow it to impact you and grow. And I think you're only going to absorb those kinds of learnings and lessons with a positive attitude and with the ability to be open. And I think that's who I am. I'm an open vessel, essentially.
Wow, that's beautiful. And just you live and breathe that. I mean, I know you over a decade now, and it just shines through you still. So thank you for that. So we can't bottle that, but we can certainly use that insight to help ourselves be infectious. So did you grow up in London or in South Africa?
No, so I grew up in South Africa, and I always had a very strong pull towards the arts. You know, when I was in school and all the different things that I was exposed to as a child, we were always going to the theatre. We always valued a beautifully culture, thick kind of environment, and it was amazing. So I always knew part of my plan was to move to London to study theatre, to study drama and acting, but not before I did a degree in law and psychology first. Okay. So it was quite an interesting thing. You know, my father was, we matriculated, and when I say we, I mean my friends and I, and all my friends decided to take a gap year, and off they went to London. And my father said to me, not a chance, you will get a degree and then we can discuss going overseas. And thank God he did that, because that year for my friends was fun, but it didn't add anything to their lives necessarily, you know. And when they all came back, I was already like finishing up my degree and doing all those kinds of things. And I was on my own, and I said to my father, it's time I take my gap year. And so he tempted me. He said, well, in your gap year, why don't you have a look at the drama schools there? Why don't you do a postgrad? And I was like, don't toy with me. That is serious. And from what we looked at was like a 6-week course. We actually found the most magnificent postgraduate degree, and I flew over, I auditioned, and I got in, and I spent 2 years, that side, which was incredible. It really was an amazing experience.
That's incredible. Wow. So tell me about it. Tell me about being an actress in London.
Sure. An actress in London, I can tell you that we were a dime a dozen. That's for sure. I think they say like 1 in 3 is an actor. So it's tough, but it's an exceptionally supportive world there. It's very different here. I found, the comparison's very, very difficult. In South Africa, it's much smaller, obviously, and there's a lot more competition with secrecy. Whereas overseas, well, in London in particular, it was supportive. So you go to drama school there, and they really do set you up with interviews with different agents, and you get a feel for how vast that industry is. And it was incredible. I actually developed my own theatre company, and we did some shows, and I did a showcase on the West End, which was fantastic. And it feels like another lifetime ago, but it was really, really so nurturing and so freeing. Like I was really free. I was in my early 20s and happy to explore anything that came my way. There were tough times. I went on my own. I was freshly like 21, didn't know who I was. Had to figure out, council tax and working and studying and, all these different things. But I grew exponentially, and it was such a wonderful experience.
Sure. Amazing to have an experience so young. So take me into it a little bit more, because you've got you had to juggle being an actress, which in itself has its own challenges. And then you say you also had your own theatre company. So that's quite a juggle. So what was the greatest challenges on both sides that you can remember?
So I guess that the challenges were mixed into one. It's so interesting. I was listening to a podcast actually with Brene Brown like last week. Although I'm always listening to Brene Brown, she's my person. She just doesn't know it yet. But she was talking about perspective, right? And what is perspective? And perspective is about life experience, essentially, right? And so when you say, like, what were the struggles or the challenges that happened there, I didn't have the perspective that I have now. When I was in it, I was just doing my thing, and like I think about it, I'm like, that was stressful. And, managing other actors, not fun or easy. Okay. Everything comes with pathology, and figuring out costume design, sets design, directors. It's a process. It's a real big puzzle, but it was quite supportive because it was with a few of my friends from drama school. We had incredible exposure to the most talented directors during our schooling. So we had those contacts to draw on. And I guess the struggle wasn't there, the challenge, but it was also young. We were young. We were fearless. You could just, I think a good attitude and hard work is actually all it really took.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. What an incredible memory about that. And yes, that youth that kind of makes you fearless and sometimes be naive actually, and just go in hell for leather, which is amazing. So what did that part of your life, what do you bring from that? How did that shape you?
So, many years later, I came back to South Africa because my mom, who has now passed, but my mom wasn't so well. She had cancer, and she had cancer for many years, for about 14 years. She was the most incredible woman and taught me what it really means to have a positive mindset, right? So I say that's my blessing. That's where my gift comes from. And so she wasn't doing so well. So after 2 years, I decided I wanted to come back. I wanted to be with her. I wanted to, I wanted to come home. And so I came home and I started acting in South Africa. And it was we talk about the struggle. Here's the struggle. Okay. It's so interesting because, you know, you can be a big fish in a small pond, right? Or just a fish in the ocean. And it was interesting. It was nicer and more fun to be a fish in the ocean because it felt like you were more productive. It was wonderful.
So interesting. Yeah.
So coming back to South Africa and trying to get into the acting circuit, I think because I was, you know, in a challenging space, a sad space, my mom wasn't well, I was looking for anything that I could find control over. And so I threw myself into auditions and castings and found an agent and did all of those things. But I was really a no one. Like anything that I had done didn't matter because they had no reference of it. And it was really, really difficult. And I lost track of why I was an actress in the first place. So the beautiful thing that came from it was I was actually always attracted to the psychology of acting. I was always attracted to it. When I watch a film to this day, I look at those characters. I imagine what it would be like to prepare in those roles and how many takes it must have taken to get that accent and that tune and that, you know, it's part of a beautiful equation for me. It's my version of maths. It's the only version of maths I enjoy. Okay, so that's the exciting part of it. And I think going through the trauma and all the difficulties with my mom made me come back to basics. And then of course this incredible experience of the tsunami happened, which really made me stop and pause and say, like, you know, what is this for? What am I here for? So it all was like this beautiful like guidance towards coming back to the psychology of life, essentially.
Wow. So it brought you back full circle. So you started in psychology, you went off into drama, you come back into, you realize the true essence of what you were attracted to was psychology. And then you have this event. Now, just for the sake of our listeners, I'd like to go into what actually happened in terms of that. And I found a little description. It's so many years ago, and just so that we can get an understanding of what actually went down on that day. So I just want to read this. And so it was: a powerful undersea earthquake struck off the coast of Sumatra Island, Indonesia, on Sunday morning, December 26, 2004. The magnitude 9.1 quake ruptured a 900-mile stretch of fault where the Indian and Australian tectonic plates meet. It caused the ocean floor to suddenly rise by as much as 40 meters, triggering a massive tsunami. Within 20 minutes of the earthquake, the first of several 100-foot waves hit the shoreline of Banda Aceh, killing more than 100,000 people and pounding the city into rubble. Then in succession, tsunami waves rolled over coastlines in Thailand, India, and Sri Lanka, killing tens of thousands more. 8 hours later, and 5,000 miles from its Asian epicenter, the tsunami claimed its final casualties on the coast of South Africa. In all, nearly 230,000 people were killed, making it one of the deadliest disasters in modern history. Now, Peta, when I read that, something happens within me. So what happens in your mind when you're part or confronted with such a catastrophe?
It's so massive. Again, I come back to this perspective thing. You know, when you're in it, you don't, you know, whenever I tell the story of what happened, it's so interesting because I always say the world knew what was going on before we did. You know, we ran to a point of safety at the top of a mountain. I was in Riley Beach, which is an island renowned for mountain climbing. So we had place to go, right? So we all ran up to the top of this mountain and we were like, and now, like, what just happened, you know? And the world knew what was going on before we did, and we just kept ourselves as safe as possible. So it was only, you know, when I came back to South Africa, which was a few days later. Unfortunately, I have friends that did die.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, and it was very hectic. I thank God I was unscathed, miraculously. There was a lot of divine intervention and divine guidance. You know, we were supposed to be snorkeling actually at that time. And the day before, for some reason, I actually had like a temper tantrum. I was like, we are going today. I'm not going tomorrow snorkeling. I'm like, this is what I want to go today. Join me or don't. And the two girls that I did travel with, they said, fine. And we did the day before. And the girls we were supposed to go with the next day, they were from Denmark. They weren't found again. Right? So there's like things like that. There's just was enormous amounts of divine guidance and intervention there. But when I got back to South Africa, I got back on New Year's Eve. And I remember I flew back to Johannesburg, and then I took the next plane out to George because my family was in Peta. And they met me at the airport. I think that's when I exhaled and I breathed for the first time, and I saw them, and it was just enormous. And when we went to our home in Peta, I switched on the TV and I saw the numbers had gone from what I had seen was 10,000 people when I was there to 200,000 people. I have such a vivid memory of just sitting on this coffee table and just going like, what did I just escape? Like, what happened? And it's something that you don't wrap your head around so easily. And I'm just very grateful that I believe in the higher power, you know, of some kind. And it's very hard to wrap your head around if you don't have some form of a faith, you know, because this is like universe, God's business, whoever's up there, right? And I guess it's such a privilege to have survived something like that. And when I say survived, for a very long time, I had guilt when I used to say survive something like that, because I was unharmed. I was 100% unharmed. I remember running through construction sites and feeling nails in my feet. I took off in just a bikini. I had nothing else besides my passport and a bikini. I don't know why I grabbed that passport, but I just did. And running barefoot, and I felt things hurt me and prick me and everything. And I got to the top of that mountain, not a scratch. Okay. So the things that I had witnessed afterwards, and the bodies and the animals and the, you know, the crazy things just to get out of where I was exceptionally traumatic. But when I say I survived that, I'm talking more about the emotional scarring that happens from such a catastrophe. I have a very close friend who her boyfriend at that time died saving her life, and she was stuck under rubble, and she had broken her femur and her pelvis, and she, you know, that was like a double whammy. And it's also part of the reasons why I had a lot of guilt of saying I survived the tsunami, because physically I was fine. But that emotional component is something that is also very interesting, and that's what has drawn me back into the psychology world, because we may not be able to see the emotional scars and those wounds, but it doesn't mean that someone doesn't have work to do. You know, we're very quick to attend to physical ailments, and we're not so quick to like go, hold on a second, I'm struggling emotionally with something. And I took that as my learning. You know, when I came to terms with the fact that I had post-traumatic stress disorder, I wanted to know what that meant. I wanted to see who else could be suffering with this. This vulnerability is so powerful, and we need to put a voice behind it.
Sure. And yes, it's interesting that it's the emotional stuff that can linger so long. The physical stuff we can actually overcome quite quickly.
Yeah.
But the emotional stuff leaves the scarring for
it's
decades.
Huge.
Yes. So
yeah.
How did you heal? How did you heal those emotional scarring? Or, I don't know, maybe some of the scars are still there, but the absolute rawness of it.
So I'll tell you what happened for me is I came back to South Africa, and then I was in Peta for about 3 weeks. with my parents, and my one brother was there. And it was very interesting. I'm always known to be a doer. I'm quite an active person. I'm a doer. I get on with things. I move on. And it's quite a strong masculine energy to be able to just keep going. And I relied on that heavily. I would just keep busy, you know. I was Nemo, you know, just keep swimming, keep going. And I was doing that. And every now and again, I'd be hit with this like feeling inside of me that there's loss. You know, I would have that word swimming around in my head. And I actually was involved in a theatre production, which was touring South Africa and Swaziland. And I came back from Peta and jumped straight into that. And the most fascinating thing happened. My safety was threatened again. The tour driver, was a drug addict, for lack of better terms. He was a drug addict, and I found that he was using and he was driving us.
Sure.
And I flipped. I had the most insane reaction to it, right? It was so much more. I mean, it deserved enormous attention, but what I gave it was like full throttle madness. And I still managed to have an element of consciousness that this is not proportionate. And I came straight home. I breached my contract. My agent at the time was exceptionally unsupportive and not hearing me. So I managed to get myself to Nelspruit, and I got back. We were in Swaziland at the time, and I managed to get back to Nelspruit, and I got back to Joburg. And I actually had what Brene Brown calls a spiritual awakening, but it was a complete breakdown. Complete breakdown. And it was the most incredible thing that ever happened in my life, because I found that the two parts to trauma that need attention is turning your story into narrative, being able to have the story and talk about it and not let it, you know, completely make you drop to your knees every time you relive it. You're not reliving it, you're telling it, right? And then the second part was to derive meaning. Why was I there? It was so much divine guidance and intervention. And I went on to this beautiful path of healing. I had the most incredible therapist. And I went on to this journey of growth, essentially.
Sure.
Yeah.
So from what you're saying then is two things that could block you from that healing is not telling the story. So blocking that it even happened potentially. And then the second thing is not attributing meaning to it in some form or way to try and make sense of why this happened to you. And what did you come to in terms of the meaning? How did you manage to make sense after this experience and getting therapy?
So part of it was understanding that I was meant to be there. Like I had this trust. You know, when I was there in Thailand, I was in my rather hippie stage. You know how like, you know, artists have their different periods. I was in my hippie period of life, and I went there backpacking for a month. We were only 10 days in. I didn't have a hairdryer. I didn't have a cell phone. It was a time in the world where cell phones weren't like everything, you know. And I used to have these angel cards that I used to draw, and it's quite interesting. The night before, I drew some angel cards, and they were divine guidance and divine intervention. And I've never forgotten that. I have never, and whilst I have developed in my maturity around different healing things, and I may not do like angel cards and things like that anymore, even though there's beautiful space for all of those things, I will never forget the comfort that I derived from remembering that those were the cards I drew the night before.
Wow. Tell us, what were those cards?
Well, so they were they literally said divine guidance and divine intervention. And they both came out at the exact same time. And it was, you are where you need to be with guiding light and guiding energy, and everything will be okay. And I can't ignore that message, you know. So for me, and it's not, you know, I'm greater than and I'm this, it's not that at all. It's that it's perfectly fine to go through the darkness to find that light, you know, to understand human suffering, and not to be a martyr or a victim with it, but to develop what the true meaning of compassion is, and empathy, to actually see people with what they are and what they bring. And I managed to touch base into that because I'd always been a very sensitive soul, even as a little girl. You know, I have a clear memory of being 5 years old and going to, you know, a movie or to the theater with my mom and saying to her, "Mommy, the lady next to me is very sad." You know, I could just feel her energy. You know, I could not have had a conversation with the woman, but I just was tuned in. And my mom was like that as well. So that it became about channeling the purpose around me having experienced that tsunami, and finding out, you know, what I could do with this. You know, and shortly, whilst I was actually doing my own therapy, there was this trauma specialization degree that popped up, and I was like, definitely, I want to find out what's going on. I want to know what's happening with myself. It was just for me. And it was incredible. It was 720 hours of internship at, you know, prisons and different places and psychiatric institutions, and coursework and thesis. It was fantastic. It was one of the most incredible years of my life in terms of growth and depth. And my calling just fell into place. It just felt right.
How beautiful. So given what you went through with that kind of trauma, if there's anyone listening who's currently going through significant trauma in their life, what would you like to say to them to help them start that healing process?
So it might sound a bit weird, but don't waste a crisis. Don't waste a crisis. There's a reason why we feel. There's a reason that we go through things. And if we are brave enough and we can step into the space to be held by someone that can just facilitate the journey of unlocking those sticky areas, you will be reconnected to what you are supposed to be connected to. I do not believe in 13 years of doing trauma work. I do not believe that we go through something without an important message. There's no ways. So don't waste a crisis. Let's be brave together. Let's move into what it is you're supposed to experience and explore, so that you can add your purpose into your life.
You've given me goosebumps. Thank you. That's such a powerful statement, and loaded with such authenticity. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I was keen to understand your name, and I looked it up because it's spelled Peta, and I thought, okay, you know, is that a boy's name? Is that a girl's name? What is it? What is the meaning? And I saw that, yes, it actually spelled like that is a girl's name, and the meaning was amazing. So the Greek meaning is stone or rock, and the Native American meaning is golden eagle. And when I saw, there was another goosebump moment, because I thought, how beautiful is this? That embedded right in your name. And what I see, knowing a little bit about your story, is you took flight after this event like an eagle, and then you became a rock for others, which is still what you do today. And that just, the embodiment of that is right within your name. So
it's amazing. I mean, I didn't ever look up the Native American, you know, growing up, having the name Peta was always the butt of a lot of jokes, right?
Yes.
And it's so funny because my mother always wanted a daughter with her sons, and she's got 2 boys and me. And I'm like, you wanted a daughter so badly, but you gave me a boy's name. Like, go figure. And being Jewish and having the name Peter in Hebrew and in English, pita breads, right? So if ever I go to Israel and I say my name is Peter, they don't understand. They're like, what do you mean? Like, why are you a bread? And, you know, it's always been this ever evolving, you know, teenagers phoning a boy's home and leaving a message. Please tell him that Peter phoned. They're like, you're right.
That's hilarious.
You know, but I'm much happier with understanding that the golden eagle I didn't know, the rock and stone I did know.
Yes.
So that's beautiful. Thanks for looking that up for me. That's beautiful.
It's a pleasure. It just sums you up so beautifully. So in your practice, let's talk a little bit about your practice, because that's been you said, what's it, a decade or more that you've been in practice?
I said 13 years.
Sure.
13 years.
So you've been confronted with the darker side of humanity, because you see people come to you and they share with you and they confide in you what's happened to them. And a lot of time, it's not a natural disaster. It's human disasters. Yeah. And I'm sure there's been moments in my practice, there's been moments when I ask, well, have we lost our humanity? You know, what is actually going on here? What have we lost? And how do we get back into touch with what's deeply human, and how not to hurt others, actually, how to serve others? So what would you say, and in the context of your practice and this experience you had, what would you say is necessary for us to find our humanity again? What do we need to do to bring that back?
Such a lovely question, and so loaded, right? And I think I came to terms with this concept during my degree, during my specialization in trauma. So it came to a part in the degree where we were moving into Lyoko prison, and I was now having to teach anger management to juvie, to the juvenile population. And in South Africa, the juvenile population goes up to 25, or at least it did then. Okay, so 25 years old. And there I was, this privileged white girl going into the... I really want to hear about anger management from someone like me who really doesn't relate to the world that they come from. And as we were approaching doing these interventions, and I was going to be stuck there for about 6 months, right? And as we came closer, I started to realize I was feeling anger, because sometimes the guys weren't allowed to come because they were writing exams and they were doing master's programs. And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean they're getting to do master's? They're hardened criminals. They've had an array of criminal activity. How do they get to benefit from taxpayers? I was so angry. I was so angry. And I came to this brilliant understanding where I wasn't going to go in and teach these people about anger management. I was going there to learn from them. So I checked my ego out at the door, and I developed this program where we cut out male and female figures, like, you know, the toilet signs, men and women. Yes. And so we cut out a whole lot of those, and we went around. I had 17 guys, and we went around and I asked every single one of them to tell me their story. Not of what they had done. I want to know the story of their lives. And so they would use their figures, and they'd say, well, this is my mom and this is my dad, and my dad killed my mom, and then my brother killed my dad. And then we went out onto the road, onto the streets, and we found a gang, and they all told us their stories. Okay, we went around, and of course they wanted to know my story. So I told them my story. And then what I made them do is I asked them to tell me the story of one of their victims. And again, not what they did to them. I wanted them to imagine what their lives were like. And the most incredible thing happened. Every single one of these men gave their victims the same lives that they had. And there was this enormous pause in the room, because we had started to develop remorse. It was so powerful. And that's when I came to understanding that perception is projection.
Yes.
All the things that we don't like in other people are actually about the things that we all have within ourselves. We've got this huge scope of personality, right? Everything inside of it, from our inner murderer and our inner evil to our inner magnificence on that other end. And we've got an ability to grow within whichever part we were brought up in. These guys, they were brought up on that really hard, negative, crime is natural and normal way of life. And my job wasn't to come in and say, bad people, look what you do. My job was to learn from them and to grow and to see that I have such an adverse reaction to crime, because actually we all have the potential to be criminals ourselves.
Yes.
And so how can I show them, just as they showed me a part of myself, how can I show them that if they want, they can look at the other side and work towards that side of that spectrum? And so that is actually a very long-winded answer to how do we come to terms with criminal activity and man-made disaster and man-made crime, etc. It's about understanding that perception is projection, and it's circumstance that causes these things. And I really do believe that a better world will come from a deep set compassion and communication and ability to see people for who they are and not necessarily what they've done.
Sure. So I just want to make a notice. So it's communication. So for you then, bringing this humanity right back into it, or getting in touch with who we are, is that compassion. And then this deep communication. And what I love there is seeing people, really seeing them, not the act, but seeing who they are and what compassion for what brought them to those circumstances. Yes. And so how do you help people see that? How do we help each other be that?
Yeah, I guess the first step is to actually work on the trauma, right? Nobody can start touching any of these other aspects until you've defragged the trauma. So one of the things that I do is called brain working recursive therapy. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. So BWRT, brain working recursive therapy. It's a neuro science and neuro psychology process. It's developed by a man by the name of Terence Watts, and he has the Essex Institute in England. And what has happened is he has assisted in evolving therapeutic intervention for trauma into being absolutely results orientated. So what it is, it's understanding that all of our unconscious minds, right, they record any traumas that we actually go through. And it will record the exact moment that you realize you're going through a trauma. And the unconscious mind will hold on to that exact moment. And it does it with good intention. That exact moment, it gets played over and over and over again, so that your unconscious mind has options. Okay, it starts saying, right, what if, could have, should have, all these potentials, right? And the intention is to help you come up with feeling like you're in control, but actually it makes you feel like you're going a bit crazy, right? So what happens is this intervention, it goes into that moment, and we teach the unconscious mind to dump the reaction that it's saving. And it's through a protocol that we run. And why is it important we do that? It's important because we now know, based on research, that the unconscious mind reacts a third of a second faster than your awareness. So if we can go into the very moment where you are reacting, okay, we can now use lay down new neurological pathways on how you're choosing to store the trauma. So that's the intervention. It's through a protocol that's run in creating new neurological pathways around an actual event. Once we've done that, okay, and we've processed that with this technique, then we can go into what is this meaning. We can de-escalate, okay, because we're no longer sitting with that trauma. So we can actually then start to have a conversation around, you know, what is going on in your life that this is made you pause. And it's very rare. I cannot even remember where there wasn't someone that I've worked with that we haven't gotten to a point of meaning and change and growth in their lives.
Sure, that's very powerful. Fascinating technique. So let's bring it back into business. Because as you were speaking, thoughts were going through my mind in terms of, okay, so you're talking about a therapeutic setting. But if we look in business and how often people are triggered, and the event that's happening in the workplace seems absurd that there should be a reaction to that event in the workplace, which is showing how often potentially, and I've seen this in my business coaching practice, where people come for coaching because of business issues, but when we really dig, it's not actually the business stuff. It's the life stuff. It's the stuff that is being triggered from the past and that is maybe repressed, or meaning hasn't been attributed to it, or they haven't looked into that story. And so we've seen this losing of ourselves coming through into business. So is there anything that you want to add to that and give us a sense of how we can get so lost within business as well?
So I think it's such a valid and important thing to bring up, because like you, whenever I'm doing executive coaching, within the first session, people are a little bit, they do one or two things. They have this body movement where they like do this and they go, I didn't know we were going to go into this direction, right? So it's quite fascinating, because a lot of us will throw ourselves into our work because it makes us feel productive and like we are contributing members in society. And the problem with that is that it becomes a distress intolerance. So what is distress intolerance, right? It's looking at those cluster of emotions, the mad, the sad, the scared, and all of those derivatives. And the minute we feel that discomfort, we withdraw, we retract, and we look for our escape methods. And we find those escape methods, and some of it may be in alcohol, in drugs, in sex, in excessive work, in eating, you name it, right? And we go for it because it temporarily numbs us, it's narcotizing, it numbs us out, takes us away from that discomfort. The problem with that is it's temporary relief. You know, it comes back threefold. And just like I said earlier on, you know, in our chat, when we throw ourselves into something, we feel that we're on top of things, we don't look at the emotional scarring. It's equivalent to, okay, I've got a sports injury, let me go to the physio or the chiro before you actually deal with the emotional repercussions. So this distress intolerance becomes looking after the obvious. Okay, so when we come into the space of seeing that these mechanisms are no longer working for us, our work starts to not become so productive, and the relationships at work start to break down in communication. And actually, you've got to go back to the root of what's going on. Does that answer?
Absolutely.
You know, what you're looking for?
Absolutely. So we often don't attribute the business problems we're experiencing to deeply personal stuff. Well, it may be easier not to attribute it, because that means we'd need to go deep and sort it out and come to reality.
Yeah.
So you spoke about a couple of things in your pre-form, where you spoke about vulnerability in business. So tell me why that's meaningful for you, why that's important.
So vulnerability in business, what does it mean? It means showing up. It means showing up. It means putting your hand up when you need help. It means asking for certain results, setting healthy boundaries. And it actually is all about encompassing a well-grounded communicative platform. You know, research actually has shown that companies that are led by leaders who are okay with their vulnerability are actually succeeding twice as fast as those who don't.
Amazing.
So it is this exciting new era. And I think with this pandemic going on, all of those vulnerabilities are being exposed, whether you like it or not.
Yes.
And the companies that are thriving, right, that are, I hate the word, I actually vowed I wouldn't say it, so maybe I won't. No, okay, pivot, okay? Those companies that are doing the pivoting, I actually hate that word, but anyway, with all of these changes and all the companies that are deciding to reinvent themselves, even knowing that they don't know how they're going to do it, but are standing up and saying, please, anyone who does know, come on board, we're ready to get to work. Those are the companies that are going to be very successful. You know, it's been you know, during lockdown in South Africa, you know, in the end of March, we had the 5 weeks hard lockdown. And let me tell you, I've never been busier from a corporate level. I had these huge global corporates where they had a number of different MDs, and I had to assist in helping their stress management, helping them delegate to their teams, reach out, look after each other. And it was amazing, because the work that we were actually doing was normalizing and stabilizing their home environment first, because you can run a business like a family, but you can't run your family like a business. And when you get those foundations going and those foundations right, through developing through your vulnerability, you have unbelievable channels of communication and healthy boundaries. And that's, I find, the equation to success.
That's incredible. And thank you for those powerful insights, because yes, what we're finding now is, yes, we've got this complete overlap of home and business like never before. And how do you separate those? Yes, exactly. You're at home right now and you have 2 gorgeous little daughters. And what I love what you're saying about the vulnerability, because that's bringing again the humanity right back into business, that it's okay. Yeah. We are human. We don't have to be steely characters all the time and pretend to know it all, or to have this it's okay exterior when you're breaking down inside. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that right to the forefront. And the companies that you've been working with right now, because what you're also touching on is so important right now with this global crisis. I'm certainly seeing in my clients' lives and businesses crisis like never before, and an overlap of life and financial and business, and it's just all overlapping, and people are freaking out because they have no idea how to deal with so many stresses at once. What would your message be, or some practical advice when this is happening right now in leaders' lives, and they trying to help their staff deal with all this stuff? What can they do?
Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. There have to be boundaries. You know, when I moved my practice onto online, I knew that this was going to be a very big challenge, not because of the technology, and sometimes it is a challenge, but because I never wanted my work energy to be in my home environment. I've always been very clear about that. And so the boundaries had to be set. So I would be working my normal hours. I've got 2 little cutie pies that are being homeschooled, right? They have online classes, and then I have to fill in the gaps. And I've got a husband that for the first 5 weeks, it was amazing because he was home and he could help. But then he went back to work and I landed myself in it. But it was all about the boundaries. So I said to my husband, right, we need to figure out what are 3 things that we can do for ourselves every single day. One of them was, as soon as I finish work, I leave my office and I change my clothes. Okay, decompress, change my clothes, don't want that energy with me. I then would make sure that I had a cup of tea. It's how I end my day. Work day is a cup of tea. It's like symbolic. And my kids know once I've had that tea, let's go. I would then make sure my husband and I, we played cards every single day. We love Kaluki. I'm very good at it. Then we would walk up and down our driveway. or do exercise. It was the strangest thing. We haven't got the longest driveway. It's 60 meters, but we would walk up and down and up and down. And what happened when we did that is that we started to just talk. We started to unpack things. It like was this conscious like stream that just kept going, and it became addictive for us because we managed to touch base with each other. And from there, we decided on different boundaries, and I would do yoga and I would do meditation and I do those kinds of things. But my message is that if we don't have boundaries, we actually open ourselves up to so many negative potentials, and I call it leaking. You have to have boundaries as to how much news you're going to consume. You have to have boundaries as to how many clients you see in a week. You have to have boundaries as to when is your downtime so that you can restore and recharge. You know, it's the answer to absolutely everything. But it is also about the discipline to make sure that you put it into practice. A patience game to see what works for you.
Peta, I lost you for 2 seconds. Can you?
Oh,
a patience
back
game.
Up.
Yes.
I said that it's a patience game because you've got to see what works for you and what potentially doesn't. You know, which is hard.
Absolutely. What I'm loving though is the way you've started with the boundaries. So make the very, very distinctive and clear boundaries, which is so difficult when you're working from home and you have your family all around you. So that's key, absolutely key. But then being okay. And when you've got those boundaries, you almost give yourself those pauses where you can be vulnerable. And like you said, then it opens up the opportunities for communication and connection, which is healing in itself. And when you bring all those things in, that then gives you the opportunities to just be able to take stock and be able to move on and energize. The one thing that's coming to me too is the boundaries to be able to also not take on everything. I know one client who said to me the other day, Carmen, people are phoning me from everywhere because she is a server. She serves so much. And she said, I can't do this anymore. I've got people phoning me from every angle and place and country even. And they have financial burdens, they have business burdens, they have health burdens. How do I help? And I said to her, well, you just cannot take it all on.
No, you can't take it all on. You have to understand, you know, that analogy of the spoons. You know, if you've got 6 spoons, if you think about your day and you allocate the number of spoons you need, you know, if you've got 6 spoons and now they're requiring 10, like, sorry, but you only got 6 spoons, you know?
Yes, exactly. Nice, absolutely. Yeah. Such lovely thoughts. Thank you. Thank you very much, Peta. So you've got these 2 gorgeous daughters and you've created some boundaries. But how do you stay truly energized? Do you have anything that you do that's really meaningful to you that works?
So I love Pilates. Pilates energizes me enormously because I also used to be a dancer. So it immediately taps back into that dancer strength and core and movement. I love Pilates. I'm missing my machines because, you know, the studios aren't open. So I do a lot of Pilates and I walk a lot. But more importantly, I meditate and I spend time with my kids. They force me to be present and we play. You know, there's something so special about sitting on the floor and playing. And I mean, they're 5 and 8 years old, so it's not like I have to be on the floor all the time, but I find that when I'm on the floor, I am in a better space to be interacting, you know, and it's quite amazing what happens. And we spend a lot of time. I'm lucky that I've got girls, because I think I really am a girl's mom. And we all color in at different time. Like, you know, I've got my adults coloring in and they've got theirs. I don't like sharing. But it's just all part of, you know, making sure that you have things that connect you to be present. You know, play is my best thing. That definitely energizes me.
Stunning. So if you don't have kids, rent a kid and play.
Absolutely. Or, or, you know, there is playfulness doesn't necessarily mean you have to be connected to a child.
Exactly.
You know, being fun and engaging in things. Don't forget that physical exercise is actually, it's putting your body into play. It's awakening energy. So you don't necessarily need a child. You can have pets as well that take you there. Or you can
exactly.
there's nothing wrong with doing, you know, dance parties in the kitchen while you're cooking. Like, that rocks.
Totally rocks. That's me. That's my play.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. So as a closing thought, Peta, in your experience as a tsunami survivor, taking into even your acting side of things, and now a trauma therapist with so much value that you bring into the world, what would you say is the critical factor in thriving no matter what life throws at you?
Such a good question. I think the biggest thing is knowing that everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
Everything changes. Nothing is permanent. So that feeling of being stuck, that feeling of loss, that feeling of chaos, all of those things that really make us pause and question what's the point, none of that's going to stick around forever. And it's because it's forever changing. We've got a choice to plug into an energy. And I encourage people to plug in so that you can make decisions. And it starts with looking at what you can work with, not taking on the bigger picture first. The bigger picture can be too overwhelming and crippling. Come back into your zone, into your space, into what allows you to feel your beat, and start to plug in, because nothing is going to stay the same. And it's a good thing.
Wow. I'm so thankful to have been able to plug into you and and to experience your beat. Thank you from our heart all the way to you in South Africa.
Privilege.
You've given me so many beautiful moments, and I just know that this is going to have a lot of impact. So thank you for sharing your energy, your beat. And so how will people be able to plug into you? How can they get hold of you? Is there a website you want to list?
There is a website for my practice. I've got a multidisciplinary practice in Victory Park in Johannesburg. And we have a beautiful website, and it's www.synergyholistics with an X at the end.com. So there's always that. Otherwise, feel free to email me. It's Peta@PetaFeigin, FEIGIN.co.za. And I'm happy to touch base.
Thank you, Peta. And please keep doing what you do. It's beautiful. It's impactful. And it's like you said, it was a blessing to experience what you did. And thank you for blessing us with what you're bringing to our world, and for bringing humanity right back into our world and our business and our lives. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I've loved this. Thank you.